Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you kindly for stopping by. I'm very much looking forward to this Saturday's Mindspeak. We were waiting for the official confirmation, which we received. Our guest will be the East African Community's Secretary General, Richard Sesibera, who said, I think it was nearly 3 years ago, that this would be Africa's century if we wanted it to be. At a previous Mindspeak. I'm looking forward to this one tremendously. We hold it at the Intercontinental Nairobi. It's a free to attend forum. We serve breakfast from 9:30. We start at 10. This year alone we've had some real heavyweight and wonderful guests, from Christine Lagarde, the MD of the IMF, Dr. Titus Naikuni, the CEO of Kenya Airways, Charles Ireland, the CEO of East African Breweries. My home thoughts start with this early morning rainbow over Nairobi. I was sort of stuck in some traffic. I took two photographs actually. The first one I'll show you is I'm looking over the Thika Highway looking towards Nairobi, and about 5 minutes previously I'd been driving through Muthaiga and I took a photograph of that same rainbow in Muthaiga as well. Tell me what you think. It was rather fun. I'm still very much sort of transfixed by Thomas Pynchon. I've actually gone and ordered all his books. I've started backwards: Bleeding Edge, Gravity's Rainbow, Inherent Vice, and I'm trying to go back as far as I can. Just some quotes. What's known as bleeding edge technology, says Lucas, no proven use, high risk, something only early adoption addicts feel comfortable with. Explosion without an objective, declared Miles Blundell, is politics in its purest form. I'm going to put up a photograph of Nairobi that I took 62 days ago, and you can see something crossing the sky. And Gravity's Rainbow starts with a description of a rocket, in point of fact. No matter, and this is my favorite quotation, and I suppose it applies to the Malaysian plane, no matter how the official narrative of this turns out, these are the places we should be looking, not in newspapers or television, but at the margins: graffiti, uncontrolled utterances, bad dreamers who sleep in public and scream in their sleep. I participated in the Homecoming Revolution event at Olympia in London, and they put together a little script, and the link is on Rich Wrap-Ups if you want to have a look. Political reflections: world leaders have suspended Russia from the G8 group of nations on Monday, but stopped short of a permanent expulsion. Sergei Lavrov, who really is extremely effective foreign minister, I must say, says that the Kremlin does not cling to this format of the G8. Moscow imposed travel bans on 13 Canadian officials as the tit-for-tat diplomacy of the Ukrainian crisis showed no sign of subsiding. Mr. Obama's Deputy Security Advisor Ben Rhodes said the White House wanted a coordinated approach to any deeper economic sanctions and would like to see a steady ratcheting up of that pressure following Russia's annexation of Crimea earlier this month. Mr. Lavrov appeared unmoved. If our Western partners believe the format has exhausted itself, we don't cling to this format, he said. We don't believe it will be a big problem if it doesn't convene. And I said a while back that Crimea was really a fait accompli, and I think it remains so. U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes made some interesting comments about China. Says China has always put front and center this notion of sovereignty and territorial integrity in terms of its national security interests. I think that's a very interesting point that's being made right there. And I was talking to Dr. Turner about that, and I said, counterintuitively, Crimea is a serious geopolitical challenge for China. A series of referenda on the periphery would mean a much smaller China, as lots of folks peel off Of course, the US Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes has a much more senior role in the administration of President Obama than his title might suggest. The Borowitz report, which is terribly funny, has a headline in the New York is Putin announces historic G1 summit. I thought that was rather clever. Interesting piece which I missed in the New York Times about saying, looking at Crimea through a game theory lens. A Russian occupation of Crimea raises the spectre of the Cold War, in which the nuclear stalemate between the United States and the Soviet Union devolved into regional disputes around the world. While military and political frictions made the biggest headlines, the Cold War couldn't be well understood without using economic theory, specifically game theory, which analyzes the strategic logic of threats, credibility, and conflict. It's worth viewing the crisis in Ukraine through the prism of game theory too, as applied on several fronts. Nuclear deterrence, and what they're saying, Ukraine gave up its nuclear deterrence, saying that had it not, it would surely have a far greater ability to deter Russian military action. Point one, tipping points. Saying long before Malcolm Gladwell popularized the concept, Mr. Schelling created an elegant model of tipping points in his groundbreaking work, Micro Motives and Macro Behavior. The theory applies to war as well as to marketing, neighborhood segregation, and other domestic issues. In this case, the idea of negotiated settlements to political conflicts may be fraying, and the trouble in Crimea may disturb it further, moving the world toward a very dangerous tipping point. Then, talking about it, political scientist Jay Ulfelter noted that for the last 25 years, the world has seen less violent conflict than might have been expected, given local conditions. Lately, though, peaceful settlements have been harder to find. This change may just reflect random noise in the data, but a more disturbing alternative is that conflict is now more likely. Interesting point. Saying in the formal terminology of game theory, there are multiple equilibria, peaceful expectations versus expectations of conflict. And each event in a conflict raises the risk that peaceful situations can unravel. We've seen this periodically in history, as in the time leading up to World War I. There is a significant possibility that we are seeing a tipping point away from peaceful conflict resolution now. Interesting point, I thought. Then, going back to that speech that Putin made, we have every reason to assume that the infamous policy of containment led in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries continues today. And that was what I was speaking about, the policy of encirclement. And I thought it was really pointed towards China, and this is a detour. Rumsfeld many times spoke that the fact that the US could, a measure of its superpower status was it would be able to conduct two wars in different theaters. But I think, that's not actually the case anymore, because the power has become more diffuse. And I thought China was the focus of the president's attention. Going back to Putin, Western nations are constantly trying to sweep us into a corner because we have an independent position, because we maintain it, and because we call things like they are and do not engage in hypocrisy. Everything has its limits. In Ukraine, our Western partners crossed the red line. They acted irresponsibly and unprofessionally, he said. But I was referring to that policy of containment and encirclement, and David Owen referred to it as well. G7 leaders of the European Council, this is a photograph of Canada, France, the UK, the US, Germany, Japan, Italy, and the European Commission. Photograph from Associated Press. The MH370 mystery continues, and I refer you back to that comment I read from Thomas Pynchon about looking in the margins for the explanation. The Prime Minister of Malaysia says we have to assume beyond any reasonable doubt that Malaysian Airlines 370 has been lost and that none of those on board survived. With deep sadness and regret, according to this new data, we must conclude flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean. This is all from some revolutionary new analysis via Inmarsat. They concluded that MH370 flew along the southern corridor and that its last location was in the South Indian Ocean. I'll put up a photograph of Chinese police blocking off the Malaysian embassy to prevent families from talking to the press. Then I came across an article in Yahoo, "Are airliners vulnerable to cyber attack?" And I refer you back to that FAA warning, which I referred to very early, I think the day after the plane disappeared. And this is all about whether there is concern that aircraft electronic system security protection from unauthorized internal access. There are concerns that there could have been a cyber attack. And I think that remains a serious point and possible conclusion to draw. I'm not convinced. I haven't seen enough data, but then, I don't think the authorities will want to admit such a thing if it did happen. Coming to international markets, it's interesting that think tank Open Europe argues that Russia's importance to the City of London has been overstated. Indicates that Russian investment in London is worth £27 billion, representing just 0.5% of total assets invested in London. Currency markets, the euro is firmer, 138.34, dollar index 79.96, couldn't break through that level I've been speaking for about, slipped off again, doesn't trade with enough vigor or conviction in my view. Japanese yen 102.34, the Swiss franc 0.8812, pound 164.90, might be a buying opportunity here. Aussie 0.9133, this is now at a 2014 high, and it's decoupling, interestingly, from a previously near lockstep correlation with China and perceptions around China growth. India rupee 60.505, South Korean won 1079.41. The rial is at 232.34, the Egyptian pound 696.28, where it's been for a great deal of time, and the rand is at 1083.52. The euro has firmed 0.1% in the last 3 months. Dollar has lost 1.1% as the rally that a lot of people expected, and I did at one point, never got going. The Kiwi was the best performer, up 3.8%, the Aussie up 1.4%. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index and just say again, the key level for me remains 81.10, 81.20. We've failed again, as you can see from this chart that's in front of you. Euro dollar 138.34. Now I agree with this fellow Toshiya Yamauchi, a senior analyst in Tokyo, says the euro is resilient, and indeed it is. The Australian dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart, that's at a 2014 high, and it really is decoupling from what has been a slew of bad news from the Chinese economy, and typically you would have seen the Aussie dollar turn south in that situation. Gold now at 13.665. Prices dropped to 13.0806 yesterday, which was the lowest since February 20th. I'd been saying for a while it was overcooked, but it had even got more overcooked before coming lower. But now I think, we've probably seen the 2014 high, in my opinion. Crude oil, $99.50. In my opinion, anything above 100 will prove a good sell. Coffee looks like a trading buy to me. I'll put up a 3-month chart. We had a very strong rally, a retracement, and I think we've turned higher again. We're going to see a good bounce out of here. Copper, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that, and I'm looking to resell that a little higher. How Japanese single malt surpassed Scotland's finest is an article about Japanese single malt whiskey. I'll read you a couple of paragraphs. My first sip of a great Japanese single malt whiskey was back in 2004. When the 18-year-old Yamazaki was first introduced into the US, I found its suave smoothness and elegance as sleek as a new Lexus. It had the familiar spicy caramel and honey notes of a luxury single malt from Scotland, but with its own exotic appeal from partial aging in Japanese Muzinara oak. Very fulsome article. I tried some actually, it was rather nice, I thought. I'll put up a photograph of buildings reflected in a Hermes store in Paris, and Hermes of course reported results recently, and that ultra high net worth element expenditure continues to perform very strongly. Hermes of course has the benefit of excess demand, waiting lists and fewer stores than competitors. I'll also put up a photograph of customers waiting in line to enter a Hermes store. operated by Hermes International in Tsim Tsui area of Hong Kong in China. Coming to Africa, I wrote the following piece over the weekend. Mixed performance continues to be witnessed in Africa's markets. I said Africa is certainly the least linear of continents. Interestingly, the two-year bull market in Africa that we witnessed in 2012 and 2013 was broad-based. Shares rallied from Johannesburg to Nairobi, from Accra to Lagos, and the reason for this was that international investors were the precipitators of that rally. And their overarching aim was to raise their allocation, to get some skin in the game. This proved a rising tide and floated a lot of boats. This year, there's been a great deal more differentiation, more nuance. Egypt is the standout in 2014, with the benchmark EGX 30 at a more than 5-year high, and plus a blistering 25.29% so far. I think only Dubai is ahead of it, actually. Egyptian markets have become very oversold, and Saudi and GCC support, ex-Qatar, for Egypt has evidently tipped the scales. Ghana posted an 11.4% return in 2014, but nearly all of that has been eroded by the cedi, which has been in freefall. Ghana's Eurobond has a 9% handle, and sentiment has soured so much it is entirely feasible that Ghana might print a double-digit yield. Ghana is a near-perfect harbinger of what can go wrong when you front-load your recurrent expenditure in the expectation that revenues are a rising tide. The open question is whether Ghana is in the cockpit or whether the markets will simply elbow the government aside. The Zambian kwacha was the worst performing currency in Africa in 2014 versus the dollar and had retreated 13% through Friday morning. The kwacha, 70% of Zambia's revenues are received from copper, had moved in near perfect lockstep with copper, which had retreated by nearly the exact same amount in 2014. Zambian authorities took some dramatic steps on Friday, scrapped 2 laws restricting foreign exchange trade, triggering the kwacha's biggest gain against the dollar in 15 months. Both the Ghana and Zambia debacles are informing us that the markets, once so benign, are now bearing their fangs, and how easy it is for policymakers to lose control to the markets. Ghana and Zambia are a shot across a lot of African bows. The drip of bad news out of Nigeria has seen the stock market there retreat just under 8% this year, and the oil shares at 5-month lows. The president might have won the political battle with the central banker, but the markets are entirely dissuaded of the president's position. The bright spot in the African currency complex is the Somali shilling. The Somali shilling has appreciated against the dollar by just under 60% since March last year, becoming the strongest among 175 global currencies tracked by Bloomberg. Its surge has been so pronounced that the second most robust currency over the same period, the Icelandic krona, could only manage a 10.2% rise. That is quite an extraordinary outcome. Turning closer to home, the Kenya shilling has confounded some expectations and remained stable at the 86.50 level. The shilling has been confounding expectations for a while now, and let me explain why. Firstly, I think inward remittances, the monetization of Kenyan human capital, are being undercounted big time. Fuel prices, which represent the biggest risk to the shilling, remain within tolerance levels. In fact, as long as crude oil prices do not spike, and I expect prices to erode through 2014 on increased Iran and Iraq supply, I expect the shilling to remain well behaved and in a tight range. The Eurobond has been imminent for about 6 months now, however. We now have had an opportunity to cite most company earnings. The oil shares plus 6.25% in 2014 and closed on Friday just 0.07 of a point off a record set on the 24th of January this year. Safaricom has come off an all-time closing high of Friday at 12.60, which meant it was up 16.129% this year. I think it's going to 13.50. Safaricom's market cap is now nearing $6 billion. I spoke about bonus euphoria, the uptick in co-op, and the Kenya Airways rally, which was, I think, a 9-day rally, but it might edge lower today. But on balance, I think the equity market is well positioned and that we're going to see a rally through this year. Interesting article in AllGov, US Foreign Policy in Africa, Oil and Commandos. When the US military raided a renegade Libyan tanker on March 16 in the Mediterranean Sea, the mission was successful by all accounts. About 30 Navy SEALs managed to storm the Morning Glory, which was loaded with 234,000 stolen barrels of crude oil, worth about $20 million. Aside from going off without a hitch, the stealthy mission provided a rather noticeable example of what American foreign policy in Africa is all about these days: special forces and oil. Africa has become a new strategic priority for Washington, and then explaining why. In particular, it's the amount of oil that is found in Africa. And do have a look at this article, it's pretty good. And I think the US has a hard power advantage with which to tilt the African pitch and away from China. Furthermore, given the oil and gas bonanza on the eastern seaboard, and given that the pivot to Asia is essentially a blockade to China strategy, then I expect NATO to take a very forward position in the Indian Ocean. Increased Somali Shabab threat in East Africa, says the UN envoy, warned of an increased threat of attacks as a major offensive launched against them this month gathers pace. Coinciding with the offensive and even ahead of it, Al-Shabaab have become more active, said Nicholas Kay, who's the UN envoy to Somalia. They feel threatened, endangered, so they have carried out significantly more terrorist attacks in Mogadishu in the last couple of months. Kay said the operation and pushing back the rebels at a key bases which could prompt them to stage attacks in Mogadishu as well as other countries in the region such as Uganda and Kenya. Some of them are looking to flee perhaps the country and are heading to the remoter corners. Islamists have also vowed to retaliate against the troop-contributing nations, with soldiers in the 21,000-strong force coming from Burundi, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Sierra Leone and Uganda. Of course, in Kenya 6 months ago, we had the Westgate Mall attack. Gunmen killed 6 people in an attack on a church near Mombasa on Sunday. So there's clear evidence of an uptick. Kay is saying what is needed and has been needed for a long time are helicopters. So in my view, asymmetric risks remain very potent, and I'll put up a photograph of Westgate on fire that I took all that time ago. Malawi kicks off campaigning for May 20 elections, officially opened the campaign season with a call for political parties to conduct clean and peaceful elections in the run-up to May 20. South African all shares up 2.32% this year. Dollar versus Rand 1083.63. I'll put up a 3-month chart. We've been in this range of 1060 to 1140, 1150 for a while. We're still in it. 11 seems to be a key pivot now. Egyptian pound, steady as you like, at 696.17. However, an Egyptian court sentenced 529 members of the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood to death for murder and other offences on Monday in a sharp escalation of a crackdown on the movement that is likely to fuel instability. Really an extraordinary judgment, and I know Egypt has become the battleground for the Sunni battleground, as it were, in the Arab world. The Saudis are drawing a line, looking to support al-Sisi in his fight with the Brotherhood. They see it as an existential fight. That's why, unfortunately, there's this collateral damage in Al Jazeera's case. But you know, I think this is just way overboard. I mean, you can fight this battle, but you don't have to go crazy in this sort of. I mean, how do you sentence 529 members? The Egyptian stock market, of course, remains the best performing one in Africa, up 24.78%. Nigerian all shares down 8.29%. Ghana Stock Exchange up 11.34%, but very weak cedis eroded all of that. Very good article in the New York Times about Rwanda reaching for a new economic model, and high praise indeed, well worth reading. The only downside, of course, was expressed by somebody called Ms. Poletto. It is a very authoritarian political environment. There can be a failure to respect the sanctity of contracts, was one comment. But on balance, it's a tremendous success story. I'm going to put up a photograph of men in shirts, which is President Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto making a stopover on their way to Arusha by road, found via Twitter. Easy FM. Standard Chartered reported full-year profit before tax expanded 15.565%. Bear in mind, at the first half stage it was expanding at 0.59%, which is a nearly 1,500 basis point improvement, and I think these were strong results on balance. Loans and advances to customers expanded 15.065%. Profit before tax up 15.565%. Profit after tax up 14.788%. Dividend raised 12.336%. They have a healthy dividend payout ratio. I think there's a split expected in 2014. I think the strong results justify a price with the split in the back of your mind up to 350, 380 even. Limuru Tea reported some very strange results. It's not very clear on the sheet. It had to draw things from the commentary, which was really not very sensible. Total revenues down 9%. Tea prices, they're saying, dropped on from an average of 236 shillings a kilogram to 215. Profit before tax down 72%. Maintained a full year dividend. But it was trading. So I think until I see better analysis, I'm going to just wait a minute. But bear in mind, Limuru Tea is parked right on the edge of Nairobi, and it's extremely valuable real estate. And it's carried in their balance sheet at cost price. I reckon an acre up there is about $200,000 maybe even. Kapchorya Tea released a profits warning. Again, that's another case. This trades on a P of 3.335. So even after the profits warning, it's an egregiously cheap share. Nairobi All Share. The NSE has reported incorrect data. I don't think we set a new high. They had us climbing 3.55% yesterday. There's no way that happened. NSE 20 is a better reflection. It's up 0.86% in 2014. I think the Nairobi All Share is up about 6%. I took this photo of the sunset in Mombasa 86 days ago. I'd like to share with you. Then Karen Blixen's Out of Africa Gardens are up for sale for about $9 million, just under 5 acres, and takes me back to a quote of hers. Difficult times have helped me to understand better than before how infinitely rich and beautiful life is in every way, and that so many things that one goes worrying about are of no importance whatsoever. And on that note, I shall take my leave. Thank you.